That was beautiful.
It's beautiful. It is beautiful. And welcome to the popular show. We have Sophie Hayes, comedian extraordinaire. You can find her at Hug Pussy, which is always one of the most embarrassing things I have to read online. But she's half of the duo at Dumb Bitch Media. She's a good personal friend and someone who I think has keen insights on all things that we're going to be talking about today. I want to welcome our Sublation Media audience. We love you. We love Doug Lane. I recommend that you check Alfie Bound's podcast out, Ashley Frawley's podcast out, and all of the other people on the Sublation Media channel. Also check out Sublation Mag. It's a great magazine that is doing the things that other left magazines are not doing and making things a little freakier on the left. Sophie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Relaxing. It's a Sunday.
Yeah. So, you're a Canadian, as they say.
I am.
So, in Canada right now, we are both experiencing the Aurora Borealis across Canada. I don't know if you know that.
That's right.
I haven't seen them yet. But also we're experiencing a very extensive heat wave, one that I, as a recently adopted Newfoundlander, am not dealing with very well.
This is my ignorance showing, but I didn't realize that Newfoundland got hot.
It typically does.
Because it's in the ocean.
Yeah. So typically we have sort of like Isle of Man style weather where
that's what I thought.
And because of that, none of us have fans or air conditioning, and it's kind of oppressive. The one thing in the summer, it's 20 degrees Celsius, and for you American listeners, it's about 70 degrees. That's about average in the summer. This year it's about 85 to 95, which has been, different. It's definitely been different. But the real difference is the 80% humidity, which is quite oppressive.
They don't do that in the US, right? They don't do Humidex.
They have something called the
Real Feel.
It's Real Feel. There's a number of branded. Of course, it's America, so it's got
it's branded.
The branded stuff. There's Real Feel, and then there's the heat index and all those types of things. Heat index is for people who go to the Aldi's or whatever. It's the generic version, but the Humidex is the real deal. It's been interesting in Canada recently. Our prime minister has gotten his hair cut. Our notably beautiful prime minister has gone from luscious locks to what I would call a sort of Friends cut from the 90s. What do you think about it?
It's dark.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like a bit of a bowl cut.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering if it was done at home.
So the interesting thing about this is that he, in solidarity with many of us who could not get a haircut because every barbershop was cut down, was shut down. I myself, when I was in Toronto, had an appointment to get my haircut at a lovely Iraqi barber on Bloor Street, who, just does great work. That day, after 3 months of not getting a haircut, everything was shut down. I didn't get another haircut for probably a year. And and I did some interim cutting by myself that worked sometimes, but often not.
I was cutting my hair myself, but recently I went and got a professional haircut to reset it because it was getting a little I don't really know what I'm doing. So it was a little bit rough.
Yeah. So I have a quick question. So have you had COVID?
I did. I had it in March. Yeah.
How'd it go?
I was more sick than my partner was. I threw up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am triple vaxxed and do not leave the house except for to go for walks on the seaside. I've had it twice.
And you guys got it twice, right?
I got it twice this year.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a complicated thing, but we're all dealing with it. But the one thing I want to ask you, one is that you just recorded a special. Can you talk a little bit about your special?
Oh yeah. So I did a compilation album recording with Howlin' Roar Records, which is a Toronto-based female comedian recording company.
For the ladies.
Yeah, it's mostly for the ladies. It's run by Alison Dorr, John Doerr's sister. She has like a Sirius XM show.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. It was recorded at a restaurant in a mall for old people. I used to work at the YMCA in that mall, and people would like complain that the pool wasn't hot enough.
Yeah.
It was 90 degrees all the time, and they would complain it wasn't hot enough. So that's kind of the vibe of the location.
Yeah.
But I think it went well. I just got the rough recording. I think it's coming out in December, probably.
That's
so
great.
Not for a while.
Yeah, that's great. I know that when I had a very brief stint doing stand-up, this is like a very amateur version. I don't want to compare the two things. I used to do a tourist hotel in Bethesda, Maryland. And
I've been to Bethesda.
Yeah, Bethesda is essentially like, it's like spooks and government workers, and then their relatives visiting, and it's like rough. Yeah,
Lululemon murders.
It's exactly. It was a rough crowd, and like that. That's like sort of like the equal but opposite vibe, I think, is, the geriatric, at the TGI Fridays and, the Ottawa Mall or whatever.
My problem is like we recorded it in April, and I was listening to the like rough recording, and I was like, wow, I'm like like I don't do any of these jokes anymore, so it's like cringe to listen to, and the thought that it's going to come out like almost a year after I recorded it is like scary to think about. I
think like the way to think about that is to just think like, one, it's a time capsule, and that's okay. That's okay. Like, I mean, that's lots of great comedians like do great work. It sits away that other people hadn't seen it because they're not touring or whatever, and it just so it's like, actually, like, okay, just think about that as a time capsule of your life in that moment. And, and lots of things have changed in the world and in your life and all those things as well,
Yeah.
One thing I wanted, like one thing I wanted to talk about for sure is, and I think this is like hard to talk about because I think it's so divisive, is sort of like the TERF dialogue and how it's metastasized into such crazy sort of realms. You and I sort of equally arrived upon a couple sort of trends. And one of them was the celebrity gender interchange dialogue. And I thought it was one of the funnier things I've ever seen. So give a little description of what it is and how it works.
It's so crazy. It's like, I guess like, I mean, I don't think like all TERFs think this, but there seems to be this like common dialogue with like transphobic people now that like every celebrity is like gender swapped.
Yeah.
And they're just like posting photos constantly trying to prove it, like doing phrenology.
Well, it's interesting because they'll essentially, for the listeners who haven't seen this, it's essentially they'll post a couple and they'll show a man who has like a slightly more feminine features, I think that anybody who's like involved in like reading, Teen Vogue back in the day or any of these sort of magazines, they would have like a cute boy and, Harry Styles type, and for older listeners, it would be like, like the guy from Oasis or something, like something sort of like a guy who's like a little androgynous, but like, probably wore CK1 at one point or whatever. And then the partner and strong women are very like popular in culture right now. So they'll like point to the jaw. They'll be like, look at the jaw. And they'll claim that the woman is the man and the man is the woman. And it's quite funny because some of them, I think you're like, that guy's like 6'5", right? Like it's quite funny. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they'll be like, God, I don't even know. It's just so weird because it's always people who are like models, and it's like obviously it's like advantageous to be like a little androgynous looking if you're like an editorial model. So it's like, what are you even talking about? Like,
no, absolutely. Like the one was Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, which was quite funny. I thought
that's so crazy.
Jada Pinkett is quite petite. And Will is quite big, and we've seen his slapping power as a comedian. I'm sure you're taking note of it. But I mean, that's a big man, and for a woman to be that size, it'd be quite difficult. And it's also quite funny because there are examples that you go back and they'll say Burt Reynolds is a trans man.
That
Burt
one was
Reynolds,
crazy.
yeah, I think Burt Reynolds was born in 1945 or something, somewhere around there. Probably like one of the paragons of masculinity. He's like what I'm reaching for every single day. And their claim is that the elite are trying to play a trick on us because they want us to worship false idols or something like that. But I don't see it.
It's like the TERF version of like the world is controlled by Jewish people.
Yeah.
I swear. Like it's like there's this huge conspiracy that like I don't even know. It's so crazy. Like my question is, if they're going to talk about gender swap celebrities, why aren't they using someone like Mariska Hargitay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, she's absolutely lovely.
Obviously she's I mean, she's beautiful, but like she's like tall and like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
The interesting thing is that they actually will get into things like professional athletes. Yeah. And they will claim that all of the female athletes are men and all of the male athletes are women. As someone who played, as someone who like was pretty competitive in basketball and, comes from a family of like athletes. My great uncle was on the Knicks. I come from that sort of milieu. My sister-in-law was like a 2-sport, college athlete, et cetera, et cetera. She's like super feminine, but like aggressive as hell. Like I love that about her. And like the idea that would even be possible is quite funny. And I think that, there's something that's happened in the brains of people who, just don't want to accept sort of progress that like has gone beyond the, we don't want women in sports to like, we don't want anything. I don't know what they're harkening back to.
It's weird because I remember back in like, I want to say like 2014-ish, plus or minus a year, like back when I was still on Tumblr, like TERFs were all talking about like, oh, like, well, there's not just like one way to be a woman. And like, just because you're like a masculine person, it doesn't mean you have to be trans or whatever. Yeah. But now it's like, it's the opposite. It's like, there's only one way to be a woman. And if you're not that, then you're like trying to trick people. Yeah. It's just weird.
It's like morphed. It's gone from the sort of Abigail Schreier like tomboy narrative, like the death of the tomboy and that kind of stuff, to something like I saw a really funny tweet by like a noted English TERF, and it seems to we have a lot of English listeners, so we're going to talk about the UK a bit. That they looked at the Women's March logo, and they saw they had added an additional photo. And it was noted lib. I'm not going to name her because I'm afraid of her, but a noted a noted former Lib Dem politician who had said, we can see that there's an additional face. The Adam's apple is actually like edited out of the logo, and that there is they're clearly just trying to put trans women in here over the top of women, and I thought that was like quite jarring.
Well, I saw the reason I started looking at this on Twitter was because there was one specific woman who had like gone beyond the whole like celebrities are trying to trick you thing into like every single person in her life other than her and her husband and her kids are like gender swapped. And like she was like taking photos of people in her life and like posting them online and like drawing like lines over their bodies to like prove that they're actually men or whatever. And I was thinking like she must have that like mental illness where you think like everyone in your life is like an imposter, like Capgras syndrome or whatever. Cause like that's crazy.
Yeah. Just to give an example, I'm just going to go and share this screen and I'll show you exactly what you're talking about. It's interesting because I think like, this is like an outgrowth of sort of like lockdowns and people being stuck in their house. And I think a lot of people are already suffering under like the system and like the complications of the system, feeling atomized, et cetera, et cetera. And like now people are being radicalized in ways that like I had never anticipated. Like the QAnon stuff, like I kind of understand people's thinking because power is like really difficult to understand and you can kind of, if people feel powerless, they want to feel like they're in on something that's giving them power. This is
it's crazy.
If it wasn't dangerous, it would be crazy. Yeah, exactly. So what I'm gonna do is go to. There we go. This is a Twitter profile called. It's called TERF, Horrifying House Guest. And so they basically, it's a 45 slide or 6 slide sort of stream that talks about how men who as politicians, including like Vladimir Putin, people like Richard Gere.
Richard Gere killed me.
I mean, yeah, Richard Gere is quite funny because he's exceptionally masculine. And David Hasselhoff has got this story. Now, these people could have had some sort of like surgeries of some sort because they're people in the media. Like that's what happens. Like Jake Gyllenhaal is very funny because he's like clearly Dolph Lundgren blows my mind. He's just clearly an older guy. He was one of the most masculine people in history. If you remember,
they just
from
don't
Rocky
know what
IV.
Plastic surgery was like in the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael Douglas kills me.
Yeah, Michael Douglas also extremely masculine, a real looker, and a famous womanizer. And I don't want
That's right.
Yeah. So let's go here. So this is a good one. I'm going to click in here, and we're going to show you Clark Gable. Clark Gable, how was plastic surgery back then? Like people couldn't get a nose job. It was really awful for people. Like my own mother had knee surgery right before the ACL surgery got better, through arthroscopy, and she's got a huge scar on her knee. Right. I myself had my hand cut in half when I was a child, and I have a huge scar on my hand. What? I think you've seen it. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen it. But,
I don't know.
But it's extremely, and I was born in 1979, and as I'm an edge millennial, right? So Ricky Gervais. So Ricky Gervais, known TERF, also.
That's the best is when they start accusing each other.
Yeah, I know. It's like the Spider-Man pointing at each other, sort of.
Yeah.
Charlie Sheen, known womanizer, extremely aggressively sexual with women. No. All right. Okay. Alex Rodriguez, who was an NFL player, which is as masculine as it gets. He was one of the most aggressive NFL players in history. There we go. I don't know who Tom Wopat is.
Clint Eastwood, isn't he 6'5"?
He's 6'5". He's he can beat me up by talking to me, and I'm 6'5", right? So it's quite funny. So you go through and you see these things. Mark Wahlberg, extremely manly, just this guy just eats protein all day and works out. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, maybe. Okay. All right.
Sure. Yeah, Rod Stewart. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. I don't think, Cary Grant. Are we kidding?
Apparently there's Facebook groups where they're talking about this stuff too. And they'll turn on each other. They turned on this girl being actually you're lying to all of us. And she posted a video of her body.
Yeah.
To prove.
It's crazy. Ray Liotta, which is I only say I'm really touched by that one because I look a lot like him. And I'm just he looks like if my brother was more handsome. That's kind of Christian Bale also it's very funny to me, and they just don't understand that sometimes people are bloated in between shoots, right? It's like a whole thing. Rupert Murdoch, Tony Danza. I mean, come on.
It's these people have never done drugs.
Yeah. And you go through this sort of scenario and you see what's happening. And then you see this person has 15,000 followers. They're retweeting someone else who does the same thing, has 20,000 followers. And you realize that I'm not one for censorship, but you wonder what's happening and how many people are just following it because it's crazy. That's
the problem. I mean, not to follow police people, obviously, and you could follow whoever you want. But do you remember when it was a couple of years ago, there was that guy that shot up, I think it was a Walmart type deal in the US, and he had a Twitter account, and people that I know were getting called out for following him, and they were obviously I didn't know he was gonna shoot up a fucking
it was a pretty anodyne sort of Bernie bro.
Yeah,
who
yeah.
had, some mental illness
He was like
problems.
that eco-fascist guy.
I think like the issue is that we like to, I think what happens all the time now is that everybody has got to be in a camp. Like we have to be like, you're a good or you're bad. And every sort of like crime has to be associated with like, is this a good person or a bad person? Right. So like
Exactly.
recently there was a shooting where a young man intervened. He was had concealed carry. I think this is like somewhere in the Midwest.
Okay.
And he had stopped the shooter. And people who I like, had intervened, they're like, well, this guy, he looks like a right winger to me. I was like, I don't know, man. Like he stopped, a whole mall from being shot up. I was like, I don't know. Like I'm gonna give him a pass for the day at least, And there's
I'm not too worried about that right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so you get into these sort of like things where you're like, you have to ascribe certain values, like the Sully Sullivan. When he crashed into he's got the ocean, and people were like, what a hero. And they'd be like, he's actually not a hero because he voted Republican or what, something like that. Or you're a secret left winger, or, and people are combing through, the recent one was this Robert Cremo guy. And he had done a mass shooting. It was pretty awful. And people, there was dueling sort of conspiracy theories about whether he was a leftist or he was on the right. And he was just a crazy person, and crazy people often have bad politics or good politics or like confused politics.
Well, there's just like no ideological consistency, right? So it's like, why does it even matter? It's like Caitlyn Jenner, whatever, like everybody's talking about her being a Republican, and it's like, okay, she also like killed someone with her car, and got off, right?
Yeah. She also enabled the Kardashians, which is like, like maybe an equal and opposite crime, But we're in this point where like everything has got to be sort of in a narrative. Like, is this food like right wing or left wing? Like if I choose not to eat like soybean oil, am I like right wing? Like
are GMOs like right wing or left wing? Yeah,
that's a great question. I mean that's the type of thing that we're into. Like it's funny because for me, like I'm like avowedly left wing, but like I eat meat. I try to eat local meat. I'm just really hungry. Like I mean, really,
I know someone who's a British TERF that got into a fight with a guy at a wedding that I was at because she found out he worked for Monsanto, and she like didn't know him. Like he was like just like a random wedding guest at like a 200 person wedding.
Yeah. And he could be doing like anything, like for example, like there are like,
I don't know him.
No, anything, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's funny like where people draw those lines. And I think like because people get so much reinforcement, and you've talked earlier about the Facebook groups, people are getting so much reinforcement online that it's so dissociating. I saw a post recently where they said, if your family has problematic opinions and you still associate with them, then you're the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's like a limit.
Of course there's a limit. Yeah, of course there's a limit.
Like, I mean, there is a limit, but stuff like, like your family is like kind of doesn't like gay people, but you're gay and they just like don't talk about it is like different, right? Like,
yeah, that's a really that's a hard. I mean,
that's a really common one, right? Like, and they're like older or whatever. It's like, well, like, I don't know.
It's tough because if they like still like, they love you still, it's like it's like more complicated. But like then there's like the like if people are like not serious about COVID, you shouldn't be friends with them. Like that's crazy, I think.
Yeah, like I don't know. To me, I draw the line at like TERF stuff and like obviously like racism and like all that stuff.
Yeah,
because it doesn't directly affect me, so I don't have the right to be like, oh, actually, I'm gonna like give this person a pass or whatever. Like,
Yeah. Like absolutely. And like as a white cis male in a very traditional relationship, I like, of course, like try to adhere to that, of course. But but it is interesting because that's why I find sort of like some of the things about like policy more interesting in that way, because people are drawing like bright lines around things that like will change in 6 months, you know, like, or a year or whatever, you know. But it's very interesting. But when it comes to like marginalized people, I think like that is a line that we all draw, you know?
Yeah. Well, like COVID stuff, it's like, I don't know, it's like the rules are changing constantly. So it's like, can you really say that you're like a good or a bad person for like making a specific choice? But like going to like another province in the middle of like a huge lockdown is like a bad call.
Yeah.
Especially if you like live with other people or something like that.
Yeah, exactly,
but being like, I'm not going to wear a mask at a grocery store because I live in a small town and everybody's going to like make a scene.
Yeah.
Like,
yes, no, it's absolutely a different situation. You know, and it gets more complicated every day because, you know, the way things have changed in the last like 6 months, where we're like back in a wave of COVID. As like, you know, as I earlier I spoke to, it's like, you know, I've been suffering all year basically. So like, despite like my extremely cautious behavior, but yeah, it's really interesting. And like, you know, there's like sort of a cultural shift there. Speaking of cultural shifts, we had discovered a very sort of crazy article online. It's one of my sort of like, and this, like, not to follow police myself, but one of my sort of favorite weird right wingers, and it's this guy named Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin was known by Mencius Moldbug. He was a sort of like secret, you know, blogger who was an advisor to sort of the Peter Thiels of the world, and he's what we call a royalist. He was recently on a Red Scare podcast discussing some of his ideas, and the girls over there gave him kind of the heave ho, which is quite funny. Like, you know, he's like, you know, they were nice, you know, they're great, but like they do push back. And he had this article that I thought was like pretty hilarious, and I'm gonna pull it up in 1 second.
So, yeah, you're gonna have to explain this one because I was reading it this morning and I was like, this is like the metaphors in it. I was like, I don't understand.
Yeah. So okay. So just for the listener who's not going to read this and doesn't have to read this, it's an article called "You Can Only Lose the Culture War." And the sub, you know, like the sub headline is, the only possible reversal comes from strategy rather than struggle. Okay, so the definitions of strategy and struggle are very complicated here, and they don't seem to make sense. But I'm going to read you the first paragraph because I think they're quite funny. Yeah, and you're going to be surprised where this goes. So the customary color coding of the culture war is boring. That's the red versus blue sort of dichotomy. That's my interjection. Let's get Tolkien pilled and talk not about the red and blue, but hobbits and elves. Why not forgetting the fact that for the 2 centuries before 1980 or so, red, the color of anger, was the color of the left. So he's sort of harkening back to the British system, you know, where the Labour government is red and the blue are the Tories, and that also sort of follows roughly in Canada where we sit right now.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, we know who are the hobbits and who are the elves. Is that clear? I don't know. We know who is on top and who is on the bottom. Is that clear? Don't know. Of dwarves and orcs we shall not speak. That seems to be some sort of like racial signaling, I think.
Yeah. 100%.
100%. It's like not. It's very clear. We know what the elves want. They want to live beautiful lives, and I think like the discussion of like the elite in the United States, like wanting to live beautiful lives, is actually like quite twisted because all the rich people that we see in public seem to be pretty miserable.
Yeah.
You know, like let's think about Elon Musk or Bill Gates. Do they seem happy to you?
I mean, no. Like, people get so rich that like nothing gets them going anymore, right? Like, when you have so much money that like rules don't apply to you and laws don't apply to you, there's a certain point where like you have to keep doing like crazier and crazier shit to get any sort of buzz.
Yeah, you can't just have sex. You have to like choke yourself while you're having sex, or like, you know, or like, you know,
exactly.
You know, you're always chasing the dragon, right? Or you're buying a bigger house, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
he goes on to say, we know what the hobbits want. They want to grill and raise kids.
Okay, so first of all, I've never seen Lord of the Rings, so I was like, I don't understand who's supposed to be the Republicans.
If you did, it's more confusing, by the way. It's if you
okay, cool. I was like, what? So are the beautiful wives the Republicans or the Democrats?
The Democrats. That's the Democrats, and
See,
that's sort of.
I read it the other way.
Yeah, which is funny. Well, that shows you the weakness of sort of the analogy is that is like essentially he's saying that like the suburban white Republican is the normal person. Anybody who votes Democrat is somehow part of this other sort of ilk,
fanciful dream world.
Yeah. I mean, we have, most of the legislatures in the United States are controlled by Republicans. Most of the governorships are controlled by Republicans. The presidency was controlled by the Republicans. The, one house of was the Senate was controlled by Republicans for a long time. The House was for many years, and the judiciary is clearly Republican, as we see with the repeal of Dobbs. So it's interesting to see, to me, that casting sort of the underdog role for the Republicans is pretty interesting. Which he actually shifts from this sort of like Hobbit elf thing to this underdog theory, and then into a white overdog. Overdog to this like spousal abuse sort of narrative, which is quite interesting. So
halfway through, I was like, I feel like he switched roles, because then he was like, I'm a battered wife, and like I can't just hit my husband back. Like I was like, what are you talking about?
And it's really interesting because you think about like all the anti-CRT laws that are going into effect. You think about all the anti-trans stuff that's going into effect, the Don't Say Gay in Florida going into effect. And you think like, well, these are like very big states, and it's not negligible.
No, yeah, they're a huge controlling factor, right? Like,
yeah. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. But he said, "Dear hobbits, you can only lose the culture war. Even the elves use political power to impose elf culture on you." Elf culture, I guess, is like faking gay culture, something healthcare or something.
I don't know.
Yeah, you cannot use political power to impose hobbit culture on elves. So, like, you can't make people in DuPont Circle in Washington D.C. cook a steak. Which I assure you they love.
They don't cook it themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me because I think there's like a real deep misunderstanding of the levers of power here, because, like the real driver of like sort of the engine of like government in the United States is either like urban Black women, largely like Black men who've like served in the army and like rose into government, or like rural people. There's a lot of people from the South, particularly in DC, who like, grew up in very traditional families who like moved to DC and like got a job. I mean, it's like this idea that like there's this elite capture of like the tools of government is quite funny.
It's just like the like epitome of like a murder complex. But when I was reading it, I was like, this is the longest article with the most metaphors I've ever read, and I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, just for two ADHD people to like just parse through this, it's like very complicated. I wouldn't ask you like, so Ottawa, and I always liked, James is always like bereft to put in too much Canada content, but I love Canada, and you're from Canada. Like Ottawa, I don't know what kind of civil servants they have, but I saw a little bit in the trucker convoy, like the reactions to that, and per se. But what are the civil servants like, and are they all from Ottawa? Or are they all from cities?
I mean, most of the people in Ottawa are like, I would say like government workers or like private sector. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people from Ottawa stay in Ottawa. So like, or move from other places, but not like cool places. Like people don't move from Toronto to Ottawa, or if they do, they like are trying to go back to Toronto. So yeah. So
you do get a rural contingent who are like, I'm moving.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I mean,
a lot of people move to Ottawa to go to school because there's like 3 or there's 4 like post-secondary
And they're
schools
all
here.
great
So
schools. Yeah, they're all great
I mean,
schools.
Carleton's okay.
I have a lot of friends who teach at Carleton. They're great.
I went to Carleton.
But yeah, it's interesting to see because these like sort of capital cities always have like a really good cross section of people. So
Yeah.
that's what's surprising. So what I think what he's doing here is like kind of like he has this idea of like the cathedral, which is like the media, the sort of intelligentsia, and the government. It's all like sort of one thing. And I think he thinks those are the elves, right? But like people in New York and people in DC are like totally different people. I mean, there's some overlap,
Like, I feel like people from like rural areas or like maybe like more conservative minded people move to Ottawa for school or for jobs, and then they kind of like become more liberal. But if they move to somewhere like Vancouver or Toronto, they'd be like way out of their depth, and it would make it like worse for them because they would push back because it would be too much,
Well, I mean, that's the Doug Ford phenomenon, I think, and that's why John Tory's the mayor of
exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. Like it's like cognitive dissonance where like Ottawa, it's kind of more centrist, I guess. So you can kind of bring people left a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. But that's interesting. So as we go through, so we're, it's like, he asks, he goes down and he gets into the sort of the Dobbs decision, which I thought was quite funny. He talks about the Dobbs decision being bad for the right, which actually is not necessarily a bad analysis. Because I think there will be, he talks about the wine drinking mom who is, normally wouldn't be interested in politics, may vote this year. I'm not sure if that's actually the case. We've talked a little bit about sort of the political complications of middle-aged women.
I feel like most wine moms do vote.
Yeah, I think they already do vote. I think that's the issue.
They don't have anything better to do.
Yeah. So my question is, the thing he doesn't really, he gets down to abortion. He said, well, maybe, women will go to Oakland or California to get their abortions. And then they'll have, major airlines will have staff who give abortions. It's like kind of a crazy sort of he comes from Silicon Valley. So he's got this sort of Silicon Valley like approach, I mean, abortion tourism did exist in the 60s and 70s. Like that was a thing. Absolutely. There was boats in Ireland not too long ago. There was, people would go, your cousin would go to visit their aunt in California for the summer or whatever, that's kind of thing. But it's interesting to see like that sort of like approach. Like one, there's no tickets that are $89 at this point, which he's showing his age there, but but also like the complications of that, like the people who would be most affected are not addressed. But then he goes into this domestic violence sort of scenario where he said, if your husband hits you, your job is not to get him to stop hitting you. What did you think about that turn?
I feel like it's very telling. Like I was like, where's this coming from?
Yeah.
Like it's very like if you're not smart enough to like get out of a domestic violence situation, then like you deserve it. Like that was kind of like the undercurrent. Like it was like your job is to like find resources to get out.
Yeah. And it was interesting because it didn't like nothing in it. This is like a typical sort of right-wing analysis he's like, it's not about the culture war, but he goes on to talk about the culture war the entire time. It also does not actually address like material economics in any way.
I mean, yeah, like I didn't realize he was from the Silicon Valley, but like, do we think he takes like private jets and stuff? Like, what's the, like, how disconnected is he from normal people?
Yeah, so I think he was a programmer. He was the designer behind Urbit. If you know what Urbit is, Urbit is like this. It's kind of it's really hard to describe actually because it's but it's essentially like a text based, and it just sounds like the early internet but like in a weirder way, a text based sort of platform where you could have your own planet, which is sort of like your own server, and then you can buy constellations of like basically websites that then connect with galaxies, and then you can sell those, and it just seems like it's just another way to sell websites. But it also sort of operates as like an independent like operating system, like on Linux. So like you could basically boot it up, and then you're not You're
a
not
virtual
in the
machine kind of.
yeah. You're like I'm not in the internet. I'm an urban, right? And it would have been cool like 30 years ago. Like it sounds awesome 30 years ago, but it's just like we have the internet now, and like I'm all for decentralization. Like I think like the control over these sort of mechanisms is not great, but it's very strange. So that's sort of his backing and his background. But he goes on to talk about the elves and dark elves, and the dark elves are like cool people like him. I think is that
libertarians, I guess.
Yeah, like the people who are like, I'm an elite person, but I'm turning against the system.
Yeah,
like he's like talking about rich edgelords, like the Elon Musks of the world.
Yeah.
And the elves are the people who are like ruling the world, I guess. Which is, I think it's like a fundamental misunderstanding of power because, like, I don't think even the people ruling the world know they're ruling the world. I mean, look at Joe Biden.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't know. I feel like we needed like a dictionary at the beginning of the article where he like explained like which character was which type of person. Like when you read a Reddit post where someone's like using fake names for their family.
Yeah. So I'm gonna cut to our Patreon episode. I went to check out patreon.com/thepopularpod. Thank you, Sublation Media. We will talk more about this deep history of dark elves and how the world is being ruled by elves and hobbits on our Patreon episode and on our podcast. And you can get our podcast at Anchor FM or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again. James will be back. James is at a really fabulous wedding this weekend. I'm very jealous of him because apparently it's very cool where he's at, but it's cool to be with you, and it's really cool to be with Sophie Hayes. Sophie Hayes, what is your Twitter handle?
Hog pussy. HOGPUSSY.
Thank you very much for being here. And for our patrons, we will have a little bit of content for you as well. Patreon.com/thepopularpod.